The grand palace of Valoria stood tall under the bright morning sun. Its golden towers touched the blue sky, and the sound of music filled the wide halls. The kingdom was alive with laughter as servants prepared for the royal gathering. Yet inside the largest hall, Queen Isabella sat alone on her throne. Her gown was made of fine silk, and a crown of emeralds rested on her head. She looked beautiful and powerful, but her eyes were filled with silence. Many years had passed since she became queen. People spoke about her wisdom and strength, but her heart carried an emptiness. She had everything a person could dream of, yet she did not have someone who truly cared for her. She had met many noblemen from rich families, came with gifts and sweet words, but their eyes always looked at the crown, not at her soul. This truth hurt her deeply. She wanted someone who would see her as a woman, not as a queen. Every day she walked through the grand halls and wondered if love was real for someone like her. At night she sat by her window and looked at the stars. The cold wind touched her face as she whispered to herself, asking why her heart felt so empty. She dreamed of a life where love was simple, where words were honest and smiles were real. But her dreams always faded when the sun rose. The council often reminded her that the kingdom needed a king. They told her it was her duty to marry a strong noble and secure the throne. But Isabella's heart refused to choose someone for duty alone. She wanted more than power, more than titles. She wanted love that was pure and true. One morning, as the bells rang across the city, the queen decided to walk through the palace gardens. The flowers were bright and full of life, and the soft sound of birds made the air calm. She moved slowly along the stone path, her mind heavy with thoughts. She wondered if anyone would ever choose her for who she was, not for the crown she wore. Later that day, the palace prepared for the spring festival. It was the biggest event of the year. People from every corner of the land would come to the palace to celebrate. There would be music, food, and games for everyone. Isabella hoped the festival would bring her some joy. She told herself to smile and greet her people, even if her heart still felt alone. As the sun began to set, the palace gates opened wide. Hundreds of men, women, and children entered the great courtyard. They came with bright clothes and happy faces. Merchants displayed fine fabrics and sweet fruits, while musicians played lively tunes. The air was full of color and sound. The queen watched from the balcony as laughter rose from below. For a moment, she felt a small spark of peace. Maybe this night would be different. But deep inside, the same question stayed with her. Would anyone ever look at her and see more than a crown? Would anyone love her as Isabella, not as the queen? She did not know that the answer was closer than she imagined. In the crowd below, a man stood quietly near the fountain. His clothes were simple, and his face carried no pride. He was not a noble or a knight. He was just an ordinary man. Yet his eyes held something rare truth and kindness. And for the first time in many years, Isabella felt her heart move. The night of the spring festival was bright with lights. Lanterns hung from every tree, and the sound of music floated through the warm air. People danced in the courtyard, their laughter rising like the soft hum of bees. Queen Isabella watched from her balcony for a long time, before she finally decided to join her people. Her steps were slow, and her heart was still heavy, but she wanted to feel close to the world outside her golden walls. As she walked down the wide stairs, everyone bowed deeply. The queen smiled kindly, moving among her people, speaking simple words of joy. Children ran past her with flowers in their hands, and merchants offered her sweet fruits as gifts. She thanked them with a gentle nod, but her thoughts were far away. Then, as she reached the edge of the courtyard, she saw him. The same man who stood quietly near the fountain. He was not dressed like the others. His clothes were plain, and his hands were rough like someone who worked hard every day. But his eyes caught her attention once again. They were calm, honest, and without fear. Isabella paused for a moment and watched him from a distance. He did not look at her crown, did not rush forward like others often did. He simply stood there, as if he belonged to another world, a world free of pride and greed. Something inside her whispered that this man was different. She walked toward him, and the crowd slowly moved aside. When she stood in front of him, he bowed slightly, not out of fear, but with respect. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone steady. "What is your name?" Isabella asked. "Ethan," he replied. The name stayed in her mind like a soft echo. She looked at him closely. His face was strong and clear, and his eyes did not wander. They met hers with honesty. For a moment, it felt as if the noise of the festival disappeared. The music, the laughter, the voices, everything faded, leaving only silence between them. "You are not from this palace?" Isabella said. "No," Ethan answered. "I came from the northern valley. I work with wood and stone." There was no pride in his words, only truth. She felt something stir inside her heart, something she had not felt in many years. This man did not try to impress her with wealth or promises. He stood simple, yet strong, spoke plain, yet his voice carried depth. Isabella wanted to know more about him, so she asked the guards to bring him to the inner garden after the festival. When the night grew quiet and the people left, she walked through the garden under the silver light of the moon. The air was cool, and the scent of flowers filled the space. Then she saw him waiting by the stone bench, his hands at his sides. She walked closer, and they sat together under the wide branches of an old tree. The sound of water from the fountain made the night calm. For a while, they said nothing. Then Isabella spoke. "Do you know why I asked to see you?" she said. Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady. "No, Your Majesty," he replied. "Because you are different," she said. "You do not look at me like others do. You see me, not the crown." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, then looked back at her. "I see a woman who carries the weight of a kingdom and still wishes for peace." His words touched her deeply. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that. In his voice, there was no fear, no flattery, only truth. For the first time, Isabella felt her heart begin to trust. She knew that this man was not like the others. He was real, and that was what she had been searching for all her life. The moonlight touched the garden with silver light as Isabella and Ethan sat under the old tree. The air was calm, and the soft sound of water filled the silence. For a long time, neither spoke. Isabella looked at the sky, her mind full of questions, while Ethan sat still, waiting for her words. Finally, she turned her eyes toward him. "Ethan," she said slowly, "do you know what it means to stand here with me?" He nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. It is a great honor." Her lips curved in a small smile, but her eyes stayed serious. "Honor is not what I seek," she said. "I want to know what you truly think of me. Not as a queen, but as a woman." Ethan hesitated for a moment. His hands rested on his knees, and his eyes met hers. "I think," he began, "you are someone who has carried a heavy weight for too long. You have given everything to your people, and yet you remain alone. I see someone strong, but also someone who wishes for something simple, something real." His words sank deep into her heart. No one had spoken to her like this before. There was no fear in his voice, no attempt to flatter her. It was truth, pure and clear. Isabella felt something inside her break open, like a locked door slowly opening after years of silence. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at him. "And what do you wish for, Ethan?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "I wish for a life where honesty matters more than power. A life where love is not a game of names and titles." His voice was steady, but his heart beat fast. He could not believe he was sitting with the queen speaking words like these, yet in that moment he saw her not as a queen, but as a woman with eyes full of longing. Isabella felt the same. For the first time in many years, she was not wearing her crown of duty. She was just a woman sitting under the stars, speaking to a man who saw her as she truly was. She wanted to hold on to this feeling, to make it last. The night grew deeper, and the garden fell quiet. A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers. Isabella stood and walked a few steps, then turned back to face him. Her heart beat hard in her chest. She had faced wars, storms, and betrayals, but this moment felt harder than all of them, because this moment was real. She walked back to the bench and stood close to him. Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. "Ethan," she said, "if you were given the choice to stand beside me, not as a servant, not as a subject, but as a partner, would you take it?" He looked up at her. His breath caught in his chest. Her eyes were not cold or distant. They were full of hope, but also fear. He knew this was no simple question. This was a question that could change both their lives. Ethan stood slowly, his heart pounding. "Why would you ask me that, Your Majesty?" he whispered. Isabella stepped closer. The moonlight touched her face, making her look like a vision from a dream. "Because," she said, "I am tired of being chosen for a crown. I want to choose for myself, and I choose honesty. I choose someone who sees me, not the throne." For a long time, Ethan said nothing. The sound of the fountain filled the silence as he searched for words. His hands trembled, but his voice was clear when he spoke. "If this is truly what you want," he said, "then I will not turn away." Isabella felt her heart rise like the morning sun. For the first time, she saw a path beyond duty and power, a path toward something real. And she knew that the next step would change everything. The garden stood quiet after Ethan spoke his last words. Isabella felt the air grow heavy around them. The fountain's soft sound was the only voice between them. Her heart raced as she looked at him, knowing that everything was about to change. She stepped back slightly and drew a long breath. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but strong, "I have faced kings and lords. They all offered me power, wealth, and kingdoms. But none offered me truth. Tonight, you have given me more than all of them combined." Ethan looked at her, trying to understand the weight of her words. His hands were still, but inside he felt like the ground beneath him was moving. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I am only a man with no name among the powerful. I have nothing to offer you." Isabella moved closer, her gown brushing against the stone path. Her eyes never left his. "You have honesty," she said. "You have courage to speak truth when others only spoke lies. That is worth more than gold." He lowered his eyes for a moment. "If the world hears of this," he said, "they will turn against you." She smiled, though there was sadness in her smile. "They have judged me all my life," she said. "They will judge me again. But I am not afraid." The moonlight made her look almost unreal, her hair glowing like dark silk under silver light. Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. It was not a dream. It was real, and it could not be undone. Then Isabella spoke words that took his breath away. "Ethan," she said slowly, "will you be my husband?" The question hung in the air like a bell ringing through the night. Ethan's eyes widened. For a moment, his mind went silent. He could not believe what he had heard. His heart pounded so hard it felt like the sound could be heard across the garden. I am not worthy," he whispered. His voice shook as he spoke. "You're a queen. I'm no one." Isabella shook her head. "You are someone," she said firmly. "You are someone who sees me, not as a crown, not as a throne, but as a woman. That is what I have waited for all my life." He stared at her, his breath uneven, his mind filled with fear and hope at the same time. He thought of his simple home, his quiet life, and the world she lived in, a world of power and endless eyes watching every step. Could he stand beside her? Could he bear the weight of her crown, even if she said it did not matter? Isabella saw his doubt and stepped closer, her hands reaching for his. For the first time, the queen let go of her royal distance. Her fingers touched his, warm and soft. "I do not want a king for the throne," she said. "I want a partner for life, someone who will speak truth when all others lie, someone who will share my burden and my joy." Ethan felt her touch and felt his fear break like glass. He looked into her eyes and saw no command, no pride, only a woman waiting for an answer. The night seemed to hold its breath as he spoke. "If this is truly what you want," he said, his voice steady now, "then yes, I will stand with you." A long silence followed, but it was not heavy. It was full of meaning, full of change. Isabella's lips curved into a smile, soft but full of life. For the first time in years, her eyes shone with hope. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of the fountain. The stars looked brighter, as if they had come closer to watch this moment. Isabella held his hands tighter and whispered, "Then nothing will stop us." That night, under the silver moon and the quiet sky, the queen and the man made a promise that would change their world forever. The news spread across the kingdom like fire. People whispered in the streets, in the markets, and in the halls of the great palace. A queen choosing a common man as her husband had never happened before. Some were shocked, some were angry, and some did not believe it was true. The nobles held secret meetings, worried that this would break old traditions. But Isabella did not care. She had made her choice, and nothing could change her mind. In the days that followed, the palace changed. The great rooms were filled with voices, plans, and questions. Servants moved quickly, carrying bright fabrics and golden plates. The wedding of a queen was no small event, and it had to be perfect. But even with all the noise and movement, Isabella felt calm. For the first time in her life, she felt sure about something. She was no longer choosing for duty. She was choosing for love. Ethan stayed in a quiet room far from the busy halls. He looked out the window at the gardens where everything had started. His heart was full of wonder and fear. He had never wished for power. He had never thought of standing beside a queen. But now, that was his future. He told himself that no matter what came, he would stay true to the promise he made under the moonlight. One evening, Isabella came to see him. She wore a simple gown, not the royal dress she usually wore. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, and her eyes were warm. When he saw her, he stood and bowed, but she touched his hand and stopped him. "No more bows," she said softly. "Not from you." Ethan smiled a little, though his heart was still racing. "They are still talking about us," he said. "Let them talk," Isabella replied. "They do not rule my heart." They walked together through the halls as the sun set behind the high windows. The golden light touched the walls, making them glow. Isabella spoke about the future they would build, not just as queen and husband, but as partners. She dreamed of a kingdom where love was not bound by titles, where truth was valued more than pride. The day of the wedding came with clear skies and bright sun. Bells rang from the highest towers as people filled the courtyard. Some came with joy, some with doubt, but all came to see the moment that would be written in history. The great hall was covered in white flowers and the air smelled sweet. Isabella walked down the long aisle, her gown shining like light itself. The crown rested on her head, but her eyes were fixed on Ethan, who stood waiting at the end. He wore a simple robe, as she had asked. No gold, no jewels, only a band of silver in his hands. When their eyes met, everything else faded away. The voices, the music, the crowd, it all became a blur. There was only her and him, two hearts standing against a world that did not believe in them. When they spoke their vows, their voices were clear and strong. Isabella promised to love him beyond power and pride. Ethan promised to stand by her in every storm. And when the priest placed the silver band on her hand, a cheer rose from the hall. Some clapped with joy, others with doubt, but it did not matter. The choice was made. That night, the palace shone with lights, music filled the halls, and laughter rang in the gardens. But for Isabella and Ethan, the world was quiet. They stood on the balcony under the stars, the same stars that had watched their first promise. Isabella leaned against him, and he held her close. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her with a smile, not for a single breath. She smiled too, her heart full. For years she had waited for someone to choose her, not for her crown, but for her soul. And now she had found him. The queen who was never chosen had chosen for herself, and her choice had brought her the greatest treasure of all, a love that would last forever.